Yes, we're live.
Thank you. Welcome to this virtual meeting of the Plans Committee of Charnwood Borough Council. There are a number of things I would like to remind people of before we start with the items on the agenda. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and the recording will be made available on the Council's website after the meeting. Under the openness of local government bodies regulations, people may film or record this meeting, and this is outside the Council's control. However, people wishing to film or record the meeting should do so in a way that does not disrupt the business of the meeting. Also, so that the meeting is not disturbed, could I ask everyone present to turn off your mobile phones or switch them to silent and ensure that your environment is distraction-free. And can I remind everybody, this is a public meeting, so please conduct yourselves in the appropriate manner. Thank you. As this is a virtual meeting, it will run slightly differently. Members will need to introduce themselves and state their name and confirm that they can see and hear the proceedings. This is important for the purposes of recording attendance and transparency of the meeting. I will do this by undertaking an alphabetical roll call. Members will use the raise hand feature in the participant section of the Zoom software if they wish to speak, and will be allowed to do so in a queue system. Voting will be undertaken by roll call of all present in alphabetical order. Each member will state their name and how they wish to vote, for, against, or abstain. Speakers will be called forward at the appropriate time by the chair, and their microphone will be unmuted by the co-host. Speakers have 5 minutes each, and they will be timed by the co-host. When you have 1 minute of time remaining, a bell will sound. The co-host will mute you at the end of your 5 minutes. If there are any technical problems with the outside speakers presenting, then I or one of the officers will read out the speaker's statement, which has been sent in advance of the meeting. I'm now going to confirm all those that are present, and it will be done in alphabetical order. Councillor Bailey.
Good evening, Chair. Councillor Bailey, I can see and hear the proceedings.
Thank you. Councillor Bentley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Councillor Bentley here. I can see and hear the proceedings.
Councillor Camsell. Is that, okay, thank you. Councillor Forrest.
Councillor Sandy Forrest, I confirm that I can see and hear the proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Grimley.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Daniel Grimley, I can confirm I can see and hear the proceedings.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Hamilton here. I can see and hear the proceedings.
Councillor Lowe, I believe, has not yet been able to join us. Councillor Ranson.
Good evening, Chair. I can hear and see. There's Councillor Ranson speaking. I can hear and see the proceedings. Thank you.
Councillor Savage.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Savage, I can hear and see the proceedings quite clearly. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Snart.
Councillor David Snart, Madam Chairman, I'm present and can hear and see the proceedings.
Thank you. Councillor Tassell.
Good evening, Chair. Councillor Tassell here. I can both see and hear all the proceedings.
Thank you. And Councillor Tillotson. She hasn't unmuted her microphone, Karen.
So,
So this is Karen speaking. Can I, first of all, before we go back to Councillor Tillotson, can Councillor Campbell please confirm he can hear and speak?
Done it.
Can you hear and see us, Councillor Campbell?
I can hear you and see you, Chair. But I'm having trouble with the audio. It's
We can hear and right, okay.
We can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you. And then Councillor Tillotson, I just need to double check her attendance.
I think I'm unmuted now, am I? I can see, and it's Councillor Tillotson here. I can see and hear the meeting. I just have a little issue in that it's difficult to unmute myself, but hopefully that won't be a problem.
Okay. Well, we'll see how we get
Hello,
on.
Chair.
Councillor Campbell?
Can you hear me, Chair, now? Sorry.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. We can
Thank
hear
you.
you. Right. I'm now going to confirm the officers in attendance. I will just read out their names. So there's Richard Bennett, Head of Planning and Regeneration. Jacqueline Jackson, Group Leader, Development Management. Karen Brightman, Team Leader, Development Management. Kate Harrison, Legal Advisor to the Committee. Sash Koza, Legal Services Manager. Matt Gudger, who is our Information Development Officer and host for this meeting. Karen Widdowson, Democratic Services Manager and co-host clerk for this meeting. Nikki Conway and Sally Watson, Democratic Services Officers. And we also have Laura Strong joining us as a Democratic Services Officer.
Chair?
Yes.
Chair, can we just say that Jeremy Eaton, Senior Planning Officer, is also present?
I apologise, Mr. Eaton. Yes, Jeremy Eaton has joined us as well. And also I now pass to Karen Widdowson regarding the speakers in the public gallery.
Thank you, Chair. I can confirm for item 1, which is the Land off Platts Lane, that we have an agent, Steve Lewis Roberts, Penny Weston Webb as Chairman of Cossington Parish Council, and Councillor Poland as a ward councillor. We also have in attendance for item 2, Lodge Farm, Ratcliffe Road, Salby, we have the agent, Jamie Foote, and we also have Councillor Poland as ward councillor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll now carry on with the agenda. Item 1, apologies.
Madam Chair, we have potential apologies from Councillor Lowe. He's been having some internet problems and he's still not joined us, so it's unlikely that he will be able to join us for this meeting tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 2, minutes of the previous meeting. I would ask the committee to confirm as the correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of May. I will now call out each committee member in alphabetical order to respond. Councillor Bailey.
Agreed, Chair.
Councillor Bentley.
Agreed, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Campbell. Councillor Campbell, can you hear us? Can you unmute your microphone, please? Shall we come back to that, Karen?
Yeah,
thank
we'll
you.
Back.
Councillor Forrest.
I accept the minutes of the meeting, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Grimley.
Thank you, Chair. Agreed with that.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair. Agreed.
Councillor Ranson.
Thank you, Chair. I agree.
Thank you. Councillor Savage.
Thank you, Chair. I agree.
Councillor Snart.
Councillor David Snart, Madam Chairman, I confirm the previous minutes as a correct record.
Thank you. Councillor Tassell.
I agree, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. and Councillor Tillotson.
Thank you, Chair. I agree the minutes of the previous meeting.
Thank you. Councillor Camsell, can you hear us? Can you unmute your microphone? No, he can't unmute his microphone.
So, Madam Chair, if I can interject there, we have a majority of members that have agreed those minutes of the previous meeting. Councillor Camsell, I think you can speak now. I can see it's a mic. Councillor Camsell, can you just try?
I can hear you. Yes, I agree the minutes of the previous meeting.
Thank you very much. Right, it has been confirmed that the minutes are a correct record, and they will be signed at the end of this meeting. Item 3, questions under committee procedure 12.8. Chair, no questions were submitted, I believe.
I can confirm that no questions have been submitted.
Disclosures of pecuniary and personal interests, item 4. Are there any disclosures of interest?
So, Madam Chair, I can confirm that I've received 2 declarations of interest. The first one relates to item 1, which is land off Platts Lane, Cossington. Platts Road, sorry, Cossington. Councillor Grimley has declared an interest as although the applicant is not personally known to him, the applicant is known by his parents. At the appropriate time, as co-host, I will therefore turn off Councillor Grimley's microphone and video camera and state this, and I will also then state when he can rejoin the meeting. That is in respect of item number 1. And then in respect of item number 3, which is Iveshead Road, Shepshed, Councillor Tassell has declared an interest as it is in Shepshed, but as it's not in her ward, she comes with an open mind and will take part in any discussion or voting thereon in. Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to declare an interest that's not been previously declared? I see no hands going up. I see lots of shaking hands. Thank you very much. We now move on to the planning applications, and at today's meeting we have 3 applications to consider, and the details are set out in the agenda and the extras report, which I'm sure you've all had and have read. So we'll move on first of all to item 1, which is P190813/2, land off Platts Lane, Cossington, page 7 to 27 in your agenda. As per the clerk, could you confirm that Councillor Grimley has been muted and turned off his videos now? Thank you very much. As per the public speaking of Plans Committee procedure, we will now follow the following steps. There'll be a presentation by the Planning Officer, Jeremy Eaton, and a PowerPoint presentation as well. And then we have 3 speakers, the agent, Steve Lewis Roberts, Penny Weston Webb, Chairman of the Parish Council at Cossington, and Councillor Poland, the Board Councillor. So we'll now pass over to the presentation, please. Jeremy Eaton.
Thank you, Chair. This application seeks full planning permission for the erection of a dwelling with associated access, parking and landscaping on land located to the south of Platts Lane within the village of Cossington. Members will be aware that this application previously came before Plans Committee in August 2019. At the time, the officer recommendation was for refusal of planning permission on the basis of 4 refusal reasons in connection with the principle of development and in respect to the matters of landscaping and ecology. Members deferred this application and requested that officers engage with the applicant in an attempt to address the landscaping and ecological issues associated with that proposed. Since August 2019, officers have worked closely with the applicant in order to address these matters, and having done so, this application is once again brought before Plans Committee. The application site relates to a parcel of land located to the south of Platts Lane and to the west of Main Street, which currently comprises residential garden land associated with a residential property, The Grove, which adjoins the eastern boundary application site and occupies a corner plot at the highway junction of Main Street and Platts Lane. A further area of residential garden land associated with The Grove adjoins the western boundary of the site, whilst Paddock and residential property of Orchard House adjoin the southern boundary of the site. The site is located within the Cossington Conservation Area and is also located within land designated as an archaeological alert area. There are a number of Grade 2 listed buildings situated on the northeastern corner of Main Street and Bat Lane. Next slide, please. This slide provides an aerial view of the application site and its surrounding context. As you'll see, the application site comprises managed grassland with existing landscaping features to the northern and southern boundaries of the site, and a pond is located centrally within the site. Next slide, please. This slide provides a number of viewpoints of the application site. Starting left to right, the first photograph was taken close to a highway junction of Platts Lane and Main Street, looking towards the site in a southwesterly direction. The second photograph was taken along Platts Lane, looking towards the application site in a southeasterly direction, whilst the third photograph, again taken along Platts Lane, is taken from opposite where the proposed vehicular access to a site is proposed. The fourth photograph is taken along Main Street, looking towards the site in a northwesterly direction, whilst the fifth photograph was taken within the site, looking in an easterly direction towards a grove. And the final one is taken again from within the site, looking in a westerly direction. Next slide, please. This slide indicates a block plan for the proposed development. As you'll see, the curtilage of a grove would be subdivided in order to create a new residential plot. The access would be taken from Platts Lane via the creation of a new vehicular access. The existing landscaping within the site will largely be retained, except where required to facilitate the access and driveway, and in various places to enable the development of the dwelling. The proposal will, however, result in the loss of the existing pond that you'll have seen on the previous slides. In respect of the residential garden land adjoining the western boundary of the application site, it is intended that this will become a landscape and biodiversity area in order to mitigate the landscape and ecological impacts associated with the proposed development. This area would comprise of 2 ponds and associated landscaping. However, it is important to highlight to members that this land falls out with the application site and therefore the scope of this application, and this would require separate planning permission. Next slide, please. This slide indicates the proposed floor plans. The proposed dwelling would have an L-shaped built footprint of approximately 24 metres in length and 17.8 metres width, and accommodation will be set over 2 stories and will comprise a 3-bedroom dwelling. Next slide, please. This and the following slides indicate the proposed elevations. The dwelling would be 2 stories in height with a maximum ridge height of approximately 5.25 metres and 8.6 metres respectively. Its architectural design would be more traditional in character, incorporating more modern elements, and its proposed material treatment is reflective of materials used elsewhere within the village. Next slide, please. So this is the second set of elevations referred to. Next slide, please. The first key issue in this case relates to a principal development. The application site is located within the limits of development for the village of Cossington, as identified under the Saved Local Plan Policy ST2. However, this policy was adopted over 5 years ago and as such should no longer be afforded full weight in the assessment of this application. Core Strategy Policy CS1 outlines the settlement hierarchy and the sustainable pattern of growth for a borough. Cossington is identified as another settlement within the settlement hierarchy, which represents a 4th tier of settlements within the borough. Other settlements are identified as having limited local services and facilities and limited public transport, meaning that residents would largely be dependent on car-based travel. In accordance with Policy CS1, other settlements seek to respond positively to small-scale opportunities within limits, affordable housing developments, and developments which contribute to local priorities as identified in neighbour plans. The guidance notes which support this policy outlines that other settlements may be suitable for small-scale infill development to meet local needs. However, to be considered small-scale, a development should be appropriate in size for a respective village that it would be located within, and the character of the site's location and surrounding context. In this case, officers consider a proposed development would not comply with Core Strategy Policy CS1. Whilst the proposal could be considered to comprise small-scale development, it is considered a proposed development would not represent infill development by virtue of its siting of a proposed dwelling house and its considerable distance to a rear of existing development fronting Main Street. The proposal would introduce frontage development onto this part of Platts Lane, which is not a characteristic of this part of a village. Platts Lane represents a rural approach into a village where new development, even in the case of that hereby proposed, would adversely alter a relationship between the village and the rural setting. Notwithstanding this, in the event that the proposal was considered to represent small-scale infill development, there is no evidence to suggest the proposal will meet an identified need. At present, there is no comprehensive housing needs survey for Cossington, nor is there an adopted neighbourhood plan for a parish. In the absence of this, there is no evidence of there being a housing need requirement within the village. Accordingly, on balance, it's considered that principal development would not be acceptable on this case. Moving on to the next issue of landscaping, the applicant has now submitted an amended scheme. Whilst the proposal will include a removal of a number of Category C trees within landscaping areas adjacent to the northern and southern boundaries of the application site in order to undertake the development and other associated tree works, the applicant is proposing to mitigate this with a substantial landscaping scheme within the site and on adjoining land within the landscaping biodiversity area, which officers consider to be acceptable. Moving on to the next issue of ecology, the proposed development would result in the loss of existing pond located within the site, and this watercourse is a great crested newt breeding site and contains a small population of great crested newts. To compensate this, the applicant is proposing to create 2 new ponds within the landscaping biodiversity area joining the western boundary of the site. Officers consider this approach to be acceptable in principle. In addition, the compensation proposed to mitigate this loss of the existing pond is also considered to be acceptable. However, in order to secure the implementation of this landscaping and biodiversity area, together with its future retention and maintenance, this would need to be controlled via a Section 106 agreement. The extras report provides an initial update on the progress of the discussions had with the applicant regarding the Section 106 agreement. However, subsequent discussions have further taken place, and both parties have reached an agreement in principle with regards to the heads of terms of the Section 106 agreement. Notwithstanding this, in the absence of a signed planning obligation, the local planning authority would be unable to secure a delivery and long-term management of the ecological mitigation proposed. As a result, this is considered to be contrary to relevant provisions of Core Strategy Policy CS13. Moving on to other matters, these are addressed within the officer's committee report. In summary, it is considered a proposed development would be acceptable in respect to the matters of design, heritage, residential amenity, flood drainage and highway safety. In summary, the recommendation before members this evening is one of refusal of planning permission for the reasons outlined within the recommendation section of the officer's committee report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eaton. We have 3 speakers. If I could invite Mr. Steve Lewis Roberts to join us.
Thank you, Chair.
So that I've just brought forward Mr. Steve Lewis Roberts, and you have 5 minutes. So if I start the timer now, and your time starts now. Thank you.
This application proposes a single dwelling on a site within the limits to development at Cossington. It also provides a landscape and biodiversity area outside the limits, which is the subject of an agreed Section 106 agreement. Cossington is one of a group of 12 villages spread throughout the borough known as other settlements. These settlements make a very important contribution to Charnwood's continuing housing land supply of between 700 and 800 dwellings in total. The Council's Core Strategy Policy CS1, supported by Saved Local Plan Policy ST2, confirms that the Borough Council will, and I quote, respond positively to small-scale opportunities within defined limits to development. This is clearly one such site. Therefore, in terms of the development strategy for Charnwood, it is, in principle, policy compliant. The committee report refers to possible revisions to settlement boundaries, but these are subject to unresolved objections at a very early stage of the local plan review, and as such can carry only very limited weight. Members will recall that when the committee previously considered this application, it was minded to support the principle of development, but wished to be advised further about certain aspects. The committee therefore deferred the application, I quote, to allow the applicant, officers and other parties to work together to resolve outstanding matters in relation to the tree and hedgerow survey, ecology mitigation and a Section 106 agreement in relation to the use of the public land. Constructive joint working has taken place and the proposal has benefited as a result. Crucially, the three issues are resolved. Firstly, on trees and landscape, the Council's landscape officer has provided thoughtful recommendations which have been taken up and fully integrated within the scheme. Secondly, on ecology matters, the Council's senior ecologist is content that biodiversity considerations are positively dealt with, can be implemented to satisfy Natural England's tests and will be managed in perpetuity via the Section 106 agreement. Thirdly, the Section 106 agreement is agreed and can be signed. It provides the necessary control in relation to the implementation and long-term management of the landscape and biodiversity measures, and therefore deals with the second reason for refusal. The site is located within Cossington's conservation area. As such, the application has been the subject of a thorough appraisal by the Council's conservation and design team, who have reached very positive conclusions, which include the following, and I'm quoting, "The proposal reflects the urban grain of this part of the conservation area. The attractive, densely treed woodland appearance of Platts Lane will be retained. The proposed biodiversity garden is considered to be a positive aspect of the application and provides an element of community value. The design of the new dwelling is extremely well considered. The application does not cause harm to the designated heritage asset, and overall it is considered that it will enhance the character and appearance of the conservation area." A further strong commendation comes from Cossington Parish Council, and there are also supporting representations from key village organisations and residents. Notably, there are no objections. At the August Committee, the view was expressed that it would be important to ensure that appropriate planning conditions will be in place should development proceed. To that end, helpfully, a comprehensive set of 15 conditions is agreed between the applicant and officers. They cover all elements of the proposal, and I understand they've been circulated for members' appraisal. In summary, this high-quality proposal has been subject to further detailed assessment and refinement in line with the committee's wishes. The key issues are resolved. The proposal is policy compliant in all respects. There are no material considerations which lead to any harm, and there is strong local support for it to be taken forward. Accordingly, it is our view that planning consent can be granted subject to the aforesaid Section 106 agreement and planning conditions, both of which are in an agreed form. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's very timely. I'm about to mute you and I'm going to go on to the next speaker now. Bear with me. The next speaker I'm going to unmute is Penny Weston Webb. Bear with me while I allow her to talk. I've just unmuted your microphone, Penny Weston. Can you hear us? Penny Weston Webb, can you hear us, please?
I can hear you.
Thank you. So I'm just about to start the timer. You do have 5 minutes. I'm about to start the timer now. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I am Penny Weston Webb from Cossington. I've lived in the village since the day I was born and am passionate about the village. I became a parish councillor in the 1980s. I'm now a member of the Soar Valley Liaison Group and various other groups in the village. At present, I'm chairman of Cossington Parish Council. I have lived here for 80 years and have seen many changes to the village. This particular application, I feel, is in keeping with the culture and buildings of a beautiful village, which contains a number of listed buildings and a high quality conservation area. We value our important facilities, half-hourly daytime bus service, a church, excellent primary school, well-used pub, recreation and sports field. The village is sensitive to change and proposed development, so it does not change the character of Cossington. The proposal before you has been evaluated by the parish council and residents. I addressed this committee in support of this application at its earlier meeting. You may remember I was on crutches at the time. I came away from that meeting with the clear impression that the Plans Committee also supported the application in principle, but wished to see more detail on several matters, including a legal agreement which will ensure control over the implementation. I understand that the applicant and the council's officers have worked together and those concerns have now been resolved, which is excellent. The site for the new house is within Cossington's long established boundaries. The house is, we feel, very well designed to fit in with the area and will add to the approach to Cossington down Platts Lane, but will not be intrusive as there are a line of mature trees between the building and the lane. There is already an access onto Platts Lane, which would be closed and a new one opened nearby. Over the last 20 years, work has been carried out to stop any flooding within the village. We were delighted to see that there will be a biodiversity garden with ponds, which will benefit the area. The ecological landscape will benefit the school for visits and also the Mums and Tots group. The children will be able to visit and see at first hand about the flora and fauna of the area. There have not been any adverse comments about this application, but we have received expressions from villagers of their support. The Borough Council's Conservation and Design team, together with the Parish Council, have given the planning application a ringing endorsement. We understand that infill building is welcomed by the Borough to help them reach the necessary number of new houses. You have proposed building over 100 houses in Cossington, as outlined in the Charnwood Local Plan 2019 to 2036. Up to about 55 of these houses are planned for the field adjoining this application, although they will be using a different entrance. All 5 members of Cossington Parish Council unanimously support this application, and I trust you will look favourably at this proposed development. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now mute your microphone and pass over to Councillor Poland.
Hello there, members. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes, we can. I will now start the timer for 5 minutes, Councillor Poland. Just time starts now. Thank you.
Good evening, members. In August last year, members may recall this application first came to the Plans Committee. At that time, officers' recommendation was to refuse based on the principle of development and certain ecological concerns. After a detailed discussion, members seemed minded to agree with the principle of development at the site, but the item was deferred to allow officers and the applicant to deal with the ecology concerns. This general acceptance that the house should be allowed in principle was the reason a deferral was agreed and why the application is being discussed again this evening. Had members been against that principle in August, it is reasonable to say it would have been refused at that time. In the months since the last meeting, the applicant has constructively engaged with officers now that all bar two reasons for refusal have been removed, leaving just the principle and an unsigned Section 106 agreement as the reasons for refusal. In regard to the second reason, a Section 106 agreement has been written and is ready for signing as soon as planning permission is granted, if indeed planning permission is granted. This therefore leaves really only the principle of development at the site. Last August, I told this committee I do not believe there are any problems with the application in principle. The application is located within the current Cossington limits to development. Cossington is an other settlement in the core strategy, which says the council will respond positively to small-scale developments within limits to development. And a single dwelling is self-evidently small-scale. Whilst this dwelling wouldn't count as infill, it would be appropriate in size for the village and would be in character for the site's location and surrounding context. In terms of how this dwelling would sit within the Cossington Conservation Area, the officer's report confirms it would sit within a large-sized garden, set back from the road and of a design which would be typical of that part of the village. It also confirms that though an entry point to the dwelling will be off Platts Lane, it replaces an existing entry already off that part of the road and actually enhances the tree line by additional landscaping planting along the boundary of the application site and the lane. Maintaining the tree-lined appearance of the road at that point and shielding the new dwelling from being viewed from the road. This application therefore doesn't affect what the public would see when travelling along Platts Lane, and indeed may well improve it. Unusually for a single dwelling, this application also offers an important benefit to the wider village. With the application, it's proposed to create a biodiversity garden consisting of a wildlife pond and a nature area around it, which would be in keeping with the Cossington Meadows Nature Reserve across the road. This nature area would then be opened up for the benefit of Cossington Primary School, who have been invited and confirmed they would be interested in making use of the area for projects and learning about nature. I think this would be a great thing for the children, which would really capture their interest. In addition, this nature area would have the added benefit of forming a blended approach to the landscape from Cossington Meadows towards the residential garden, which for me is another strong point of the application. This, to my mind, is a positive application in which the applicant has engaged at every stage with the local community to listen to their views, taken on board their suggestions and concerns, and even offers a positive benefit to the village, especially the children. The applicant has also engaged constructively with officers to mitigate their ecology concerns such that they no longer constitute reasons for a refusal. I don't see this as a problem in principle. I don't see a problem in principle to this dwelling, and the support it enjoys in the village speaks to the effect local people think it can have on that part of Cossington. I therefore hope members will approve this application this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Poland. I'm now going to mute you. Thank you.
Mr. Eaton, did you want to come back to any of the points raised by the three speakers on this application?
Yes, please, Chair, if that's okay. Firstly, I just wanted to remind members that obviously this application was deferred in August last year, and therefore no decision was made on the application, including on the merits of whether the application was acceptable or not in terms of a principal development. And therefore members need to reconsider this application afresh this evening. In terms of one other matter I want to comment on, members haven't had a list of conditions circulated to them as suggested by one of the speakers. That is obviously on the basis of the application being recommended for refusal this evening. However, should members want to discuss the conditions further, if they were minded to approve the application, then we can obviously discuss that in due course. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. It's now open to discussion. I have Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just ask the officer a couple of questions, if I may. With regards to the Section 106 agreement, am I correct in saying that the biodiversity garden would need separate planning permission, and therefore what would happen if that planning permission is therefore refused? If you could just answer that, I'd be very grateful.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, that will require a separate planning consent. Obviously, the Section 106 agreement will outline requirement to obviously provide that landscape and biodiversity area, but that will be on the caveat it's subject to gaining consent outright. So as part of the consideration this evening, you were not considering whether or not that biodiversity area is acceptable, and obviously the detail of it at this stage.
Thank you. Councillor Tassell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can remember going to see this planning application when it came up first, and I was rather concerned at the fact that Platts Lane is very, very narrow for an exit coming out onto it. And I think at the time I raised this, have the splays been looked at properly by Leicestershire County Council that they are adequate for such a narrow lane?
Mr. Eaton.
Thank you, Chair. We have consulted the local highway authority. However, at the time when they responded, they outlined that the application should be considered against their standing advice, which obviously relates to the Leicestershire Highway Design Guide. Officers have applied that standing advice in the Highways Design Guide, and obviously the assessment of highway matters is outlined within, bear with me, I'm just trying to find the relevant page number.
It could be 24.
Sorry. Yes, it's page 24. Obviously, the assessment of highway matters, including the actual detailed design of the access, is covered in that section, and officers are satisfied that a compliant access can be achieved, and that is demonstrated on the plan submitted.
Thank you.
Right, I have two more speakers. Councillor Snart.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you, and good evening again. Through you, Madam Chairman, I think the one thing that seems to be to me is whether this is infill or not. In listening to the speakers, I think one said it was, one said it wasn't. Could the officer just explain more fully why he believes that this application is not infill in the position it is? And I have one more question after that, if I may.
Yeah.
Yes, certainly. Obviously, I don't know whether it's perhaps worth bringing up the presentation and the proposed site plan, if we can. Perhaps it might be useful for members to sort of visualise it. There with me. Yeah, I mean, obviously the location of the site is obviously set back from Main Street, where the main built form of a settlement is, and you can see as you go along Main Street that the properties are located along Main Street on both sides, and typically infill developments would be development between existing properties. But I guess that's open to interpretation. Within the policy, there's no formal definition of what infill development is or is not. But obviously, from officers' position, we believe that this proposal wouldn't be infill development by virtue of its location away from Main Street and on obviously a rural approach to a village, as you can see on the proposed site plan. So hopefully that covers covers officers' position on the matter.
Councillor Snart, you had another question, I believe.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm sorry, it took a little time to unmute there. I understand as well, adding to this, that on the new plan, this will be outside the limits to development. So possibly we could just have a little talk about that and the weight we should give to that. But I'm a little concerned that I know we've got an agreement to enter into an S106 agreement. But in the notes that we've got, it does say about possible to obtain a Great Crested Newt disturbance licence from Natural England. Now, if Natural England didn't actually give that licence, what would happen in terms if we gave tonight planning permission and then they couldn't actually deliver the new ponds.
Right, before I go to Mr. Eaton, if I could just bring in Jacqueline Jackson. I think you wanted to raise about the point about the limits of development.
Yeah, just to make it clear, Councillor Snart, the application site is within the current adopted limits to development, so is within the limits to development, not outside. So that's an important point that members do need to understand. In terms of the Great Crested Newts, obviously our ecologist has looked at the proposal, and he has, based on what's submitted in the surveys, does see no reason why a licence wouldn't be granted by Natural England. You know, he's made that assessment, and there's no reason why that licence wouldn't be granted. So we have to go through that process and our proposal on that grounds. Obviously, if they don't, they still need a licence, and if they couldn't get one, that would be dealt with, and they'd have to come back to us. But there is no indication that that wouldn't be granted.
Okay, I have Councillor Tillotson. Councillor Tillotson, can you unmute your microphone? We can't seem to get Councillor Tillotson at the moment. I also have Councillor Ransom and Mr. Bennett, Richard Bennett. So do you want, we'll go to you, Councillor Ransom, then I'll come straight back to Councillor Tillotson, and then I'll go to Richard Bennett.
Good evening, Chair. Thank you very much. It's just that if the committee, I just want to ask Mr. Eaton or one of the officers, if the committee were reminded to actually give planning permission tonight, are we able to put a condition on that before any building or any, you know, spade was put in the ground, providing that the Great Crested Newts and the ponds could be actually facilitated? Is that a possibility? Thank you.
Do you want to reply to that, Mr. Eaton, and then I'll go back to Councillor Tillotson?
Yes, Chair. As part of the Section 106 agreement, there'll be a requirement for the applicant to secure, obviously, consent for the landscape and biodiversity area, as well as obviously to implement that prior to any works starting on site. So that will be appropriately covered under a Section 106 agreement.
Thank you. Councillor Tillotson, have you managed to unmute? Yes, there you are.
Yes, thank you. Yes, it's unusual this in that we've got a recommendation for refusal and no objections, but I've got a question and an observation really. I mean, my question is, if we were to support this, we'd have to rely on trust that we would subsequently get an application for this biodiversity area, and if we didn't get it, there is nothing we could do about that. And I'm correct in that, aren't
I? Councillor Tillotson, if the 106 would require them to secure that consent and implement it before they constructed the dwelling. So it's not on trust, you know,
Right.
they can't implement this one. That's my understanding, and I'm sure that Mr. Eaton will confirm that.
Right, that offers me a bit of reassurance then. My other question is, we heard from one of the speakers that there are plans for a significant development in the village, and if I recall correctly, that is going to be also with the entrance on Platts Lane. Have I understood that correctly?
Can I just bring in Mr. Bennett, and also I've got to clarify that, because I don't think we can bring that into consideration at the moment. We're looking at everything individually. Richard Bennett, could you come in and clarify that, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Richard Bennett, Head of Planning and Regeneration. There's 2 points I just want to touch on, if I may. Councillor Snart asked about the weight that could be given to the emerging settlement framework boundary changes. And Councillor Tillotson has just mentioned the prospect of a new development site nearby. Dealing with Councillor Snart firstly, the settlement framework boundary changes in the new local plan have been put out there for consultation. The plan is at quite an early stage in its preparation, and whilst it has been subject to consultation, it hasn't been submitted to the Secretary of State for an examination in public. And so in that context, it must be given very limited weight. It's just an expression of intent by the planning authority to consider changes to the current framework boundaries. So it doesn't have any real significant weight at this time. And the same actually applies to the proposed allocation nearby. It is a site that's being put forward by the planning authority for consideration and consultation, but it hasn't yet been subject to examination. So again, limited weight can be given to that. What members are asked to do this evening is to consider the proposal against the current adopted development plan, the core strategy policies and the safe policies of the Charnwood local plan. And it's against that framework that members should be guided towards this evening. Thank you.
Okay, I have no more speakers. Any suggestions coming forward on this application? We've got to decide one way or another. So, Councillor Snart.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. With what I've heard tonight and the officer, what he told me, he doesn't consider this as infill. I would go with officer's recommendation.
Okay, Councillor Tassell.
Well, from what we've heard, I would go against officer's recommendation and grant the property.
All right. Councillor Forrest.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, if that is a proposal by Councillor Tassell, I would be very happy to second it. I think it's a difficult decision to make, but I think on the whole, the disadvantages, the advantages outweigh the disadvantages, and I would go for going against officer's recommendation and giving planning permission for this site. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I go any further, I'd like to bring in Catherine Harrison.
Yes, sorry, can we, Catherine Harrison, legal advisor, can we just check that whether there was a proposition? I don't recall any of the councillors pushing us forward as a proposition in those words, and Councillor Snart, Councillor Tillotson seemed to say the same thing. And can we just clarify who's made any propositions, please?
Can I just go back to Councillor, go in the order you all spoke. So, Councillor Snart, your proposal was?
To go with officer's recommendation, and the reason for it is to uphold the strategy CS1 because this is not considered infill.
Thank you. Councillor Tassell, your proposal?
My proposal was to go against the officer's recommendation because of what's been put in front of us. I can't see that we've got any reason to refuse it. They're trying to help with the ecology and everything, and providing the S106 is agreed, I can't see why we can refuse it.
Thank you. So I'll come back for clarification on this. So I have Councillor Forrest, we're agreeing to second Councillor Tassell, I believe. Could you just formally?
That That's correct, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So far, as I can see, we have one recommendation and proposal to go with officer's recommendation. And we have another proposal to go against officer's recommendation that has been seconded by another councillor. Catherine Harrison, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think if we've got Councillor Snart with a formal proposition first, we should check whether anyone was seconding that. I know you went in order of speakers that had hands raised.
Yeah.
If someone was waiting to speak that was planning to second it, it was put on the table first. If no one else, then we'll move to the
right.
other one.
I've got after this, I've got Jacqueline Jackson. Now, Councillor Savage has asked to speak.
I'd like to second Councillor Smart's recommendation.
Right. Thank you. Jacqueline Jackson.
It was just a little reminder. I mean, it sounds like Councillor Snart's recommendation is going forward first, as it's first on the table. But just to remind members, if you're going against officer recommendation, obviously that's fine. You know, you can make whatever decision you want. It's the same with granting planning permission as if you were overturning to refuse. You need to give reasons based on the development plan. And if you consider something should be whether or not it's in accordance, and if you're going against the development plan, why, what are the issues that outweigh those factors. So members might want to be given some weight to that, or asking officers some questions to help them formulate those reasons.
I just need a bit of clarification here. If we take the first proposal and then we come to the second one, which was against officers' recommendation, do the councillors have to be clear in their minds for the reasons for going officers' recommendation now or after we've done the first vote?
I would go to legal, might be able to come in on this as well, but I would think the reasons if you're going with officer recommendation for the decision are set out in the report. So yeah. Councillor Snart wouldn't need to set those out. It would be if you're going against officer recommendation, right. There would need to be some more debate about that.
Yeah, well, we'll do that after we've had the first vote. So we'll move. We've had a proposal to go with officer's recommendation by Councillor Snart, seconded by Councillor Savage. I will now do a roll call, and if you could please say whether, and this is for the first recommendation to go with officers, first vote for go with officers recommendation. If you can say for, against, or abstain, and your name, please. And this is done alphabetically. So I'll start with.
Sorry, Chair. Sorry, Catherine Harrison, legal. Can we just check before we do a roll call? Just remind councillors that in order to vote in the debate, you need to have been able to have fully heard and followed the debate.
Yes.
And it's few councillors at times couldn't speak, so if anyone hasn't followed, heard all the speakers and followed the debate.
Could I just have a indication either by putting up your hand if you have not heard the full debate? No hands have gone up, so we can proceed. So Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bailey, against.
Thank you. Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Chair. Ian Bentley, against.
Councillor Roy Camsell.
Yes, Chair. I'm for officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Sandy Forrest. You've just muted yourself, Councillor.
So sorry, Chair. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
I am against.
Thank you. Councillor Grimley is abstaining because he's not here. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair. Against.
Thank you. Councillor Lowe is not here. Councillor Pauline Ranson.
Councillor Ranson against.
Thank you. Councillor John Savage.
Councillor Savage for the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor David Snart.
For the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Joan Tassell.
I'm against.
Thank you. Councillor Jenny Tillotson.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm, my only issue has been my ability to unmute myself. I've heard the whole thing, and I am against the recommendation.
Thank you very much. And then myself, I'm against officer's recommendation. So I make that, I'll have a confirmation from the officers, please. The result of that.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Catherine Harrison, legal. Yeah, that was a vote of 8 against the officer's recommendation and 3 for. So the officer's recommendation has not been carried.
Okay, thank you very much.
And Madam Chair, I can confirm as the clerk to the meeting the same votes of 8 against and 3 for against the officer's recommendations.
Thank you. Now we had against the officer's recommendation. We have had that put forward to us, and I would like now to open for the reasons we're going against officer's recommendation, and we may need a bit of help from the officers here. So I think it was Councillor Tillotson who proposed, no, who proposed against officer's recommendation?
I did.
Councillor Tassell. Yes, thank you.
And Councillor Forrest, I seconded
it. That's right. Thank you very much indeed. So, right, Councillor Tassell, do you want to commence? And then Councillor Ranson.
Thank you very much. Listening to everything that was said, I can't see any reason to refuse this property. And I feel that if it ever went to appeal, we wouldn't have a leg to stand on. That's number one. But number two is the fact that none of the speakers were against it. That's number two. The other thing is Leicestershire County Council weren't against the fact that it was going onto a narrow lane. Number three, the other thing is that it's going to clear up the area. They've actually offered an S106 agreement to maintain the ponds and the grounds and the trees, and I therefore don't think that there's any reason why we should go with the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Ranson.
Thank you, Chair. If the committee are minded to go against officer's recommendation, can I put this condition in that no work starts until the ponds and S106 agreement is actually overseen and actually dealt with? That's the one thing that I'm actually a little bit concerned. So if they can't commit to what they're said they have to do, then the building doesn't happen. Okay, and that's my down to earth realization.
I think that has been clarified, but I will ask.
That's what I'm asking, Chair.
Mr. Eaton or Jacqueline Jackson, that no building can be undertaken until the documentation has been signed. But if you could clarify, please.
Yes, Chair. So that is in. Sorry, Jackie.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
Sorry. Sorry for interrupting. I was just going to clarify, Chair, that is covered within the draft heads of terms in the Section 106 agreement we've had and agreed with the applicant. So that will be covered accordingly within the 106.
Okay. Right. Do we need...
Chair, may I come in?
Certainly.
Excuse me, Chair, may I come in?
Sorry, it's Jacqueline Jackson for those that can't see you, Jacqueline.
Sorry, Jacqueline Jackson speaking. I just wanted to go to perhaps walk the members through some of the things that they need to be considering with regards to the planning policies, because that should be our starting point, and then we'll look once you know where you're positioning yourself with the planning policies to other material considerations. So if members are minded to grant planning permission, I would recommend that that's a two-stage recommendation. The first one will be to secure the signing and sealing of the 106 prior to then issuing planning permission subject to conditions, and we'll have to think about what that might be. But members may well want to redelegate the decision of the wording and which conditions to include back to officers. With regards to the policy, obviously I'll take members' minds back to the earlier debate. There is some there's some decisions for the decision maker, so yourself to take as to whether or not this constitutes infill development. Now that can be debated either way, as you've heard by the officers and the speakers. The site is within the limits to development, so you may well think that it's infill because it's within the limits. As you've heard by officers, that wasn't our interpretation of the word infill, but there is no definitive definition in the local plan. So you need to consider whether or not it is in accordance with policy CS1. I will take members through the wording of policy CS1, if that's okay, because I'm not sure members have the wording directly in front of them or not. So it says we will meet local social economic needs for development in other settlements by providing at least 500 homes through the plan period, responding positively to small scale opportunities within the defined limits to development, respond positively to affordable housing development in accordance with positive policy CS3, safeguard services and facilities, and respond positively to development which contributes to local priorities as identified within the neighbourhood plan. So I would, it might be worth members just debating how they see this and whether they're suggesting that the policy complies with this policy or doesn't comply with this policy, or complies in part, because that will help officers put together the reasons for approval.
Thank you. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to officers for that sort of clarification. In my mind, that fits CS1 quite easily. It sits within the limits of development. The fact that there's no complete definitive definition as to what an infill is, if it sits in development quite happily and it sits sympathetically and it's a 3-bedroom house, I think it ticks all the boxes for me.
Thank you. Has anybody else want to enter the discussion? Councillor Ranson.
Chair, thank you very much. I agree with Councillor Bailey that this now is actually, the officers have explained the integrated things. So in actual fact, I agree with Councillor Bailey that this does fit in within the limits of development within it. And the fact is that the recommendation as well, secure the signing of the 106. It's a very good no play additive, because simple reason is that if they don't sign the 106 agreement, nothing happens. Am I correct from the officers?
Yes, you are. Councillor Forrest.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just like to remind members that in fact we've never had a problem with the house, with the proposed new dwelling on the site. It has always been the ecological issues that have been raised about this. development. We've never had a problem with the actual size of the dwelling, the number of bedrooms, the way it's been designed. And I think that there is so much space between those houses along the main street in Cossington, where the Grove is. I can't see it as development at all, as infill at all. I don't think it really matches what I would think of as infill. And what we were always concerned about was the ecology. And we have heard tonight that with the agreement there, we have safeguarded our doubts about the ecology on the site.
Thank you. Catherine Harrison, you wanted to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was just in response to Councillor Vanson's last comment when in relation to the 106 agreement. Councillor Vanson was clear that she wanted absolutely nothing to happen on the site until the ecological new ponds and planting and things were put in. It was just to clarify and just to make sure Councillor Vanson's aware. Ordinarily in the 106 agreement, the commencement of development has some standard caveats in it where things like archaeological investigations and groundworks are not classed as development. So it's only minor works, it's site preparations as opposed to the actual dwelling being built. But that would be the standard wording that would be in a 106 agreement. So just to check that the council was happy that the site clearance, the initial preparations for development would be able to go ahead.
Okay. All right. I have no other speakers, and the officers will put together. Oh, Jacqueline Jackson, you want to come back?
Yes, I was just going to help members say thank you for that. It's been quite useful for us to be able to put forward that reason. So from what members are saying, they are telling me that they consider the design to be appropriate along with its impact, the dwelling's impact on the ecology and the heritage asset. Therefore, you consider the application to be in accordance with CS2, CS13 and CS14, and it is within the limits, so you consider it is in accordance with ST2 and general accordance with policy CS1 of the development plan. And for that reason, you propose that the development is acceptable.
Everybody's agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. So we will now take forward to the vote. So this is...
Sorry, Chair. Sorry, Catherine Harrison. Just need to, I think the proposed and seconder may want to consider adding delegated authority to officers to do the conditions, the usual wording we have.
Yes. Just to clarify, Councillor Tassell, Councillor Forrest, are you in agreement that delegated authority be given to the officers in the usual manner to put forward the reasons?
Yes, I'm in agreement with that.
Councillor Forrest?
I have no problem with that at all, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. We now move to the vote.
Can I just clarify, just for the record, I bet I'm going to say the same thing as Councillor Ms Harrison. So the recommendation is to give authority to enter into the S106 agreement, and then once that's completed, to issue planning permission conditionally, the details of the conditions though to be delegated back to the planning officers.
Agreed? Do you want to come back again, Catherine?
Yes, sorry. Usually we would have if we were granting permission, a recommendation A with the heads of terms confirmed. And I know it's been in the debate, but if we could just clarify and confirm exactly what the heads of terms are that you're putting forward. I'm assuming that it is that the cite the ecological offsetting scheme. So I think I'll go back to Jeremy so for the exact wording of what they're calling their scheme, but presumably that is put in place before the development of the dwelling commences. And I just think we need to have that clarified and approved by members, or whatever it is that you do want in the 106 agreement, so that it has been agreed by members what the 106 agreement is to cover. Perhaps, so to go back to Jeremy, if he has got the wording of what they call their mitigation scheme, to make it a bit clearer for members, please.
Mr. Eaton.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's landscape and biodiversity area scheme. They refer to it within their application. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Councillor Tassell, you wanted to come back?
Yes. Well, Councillor Ranson has. I was under the impression that the S106 was to maintain the old site and keep it in a prime condition and a natural condition with the S106. I know that the trees were mentioned, but then Councillor Ranson brought up the ponds, which I agree, and the newts, which I agree do want protecting. So therefore, the S106 money, the S106 should state that they keep the site for the newts and the trees and a natural site.
I think we need back to, the waters have got muddied a bit now. We need to go back to Catherine, because for the ponds, it's a different thing. Catherine, I think we've got muddied water now.
So thank you, Chair. Yes, the ponds, and planning officers, please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but the scheme that Jeremy's just mentioned, that includes the trees and the ponds and the newt habitat. So that's all in part of that scheme that Jeremy's just described. That's what the applicant's calling it in their application.
Okay.
That's correct. For the mitigation area, obviously the garden area wouldn't be included in that, but for the mitigation area, so the area that's being used to mitigate the impact on ecology, then that's the area that's being included, and it would be required to be set out, installed and then maintained through the 106 agreement. It's not money either. I don't want there to be any confusion. It's for it to be provided and maintained.
Okay. Can we move forward now to the vote? Right. So we're all clear now, so I'm going to the vote. Again, it's alphabetical order, and if it could be, this is to, what are we doing? It's for the proposal, that the proposition that we're going against officers' recommendation. So what we're now voting for is what we've all just discussed. So Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bailey, 4.
Thank you. Councillor Ian Bentley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Councillor Ian Bentley, 4.
Councillor Roy Camsell. Can you unmute yourself, Councillor, please? Councillor Camsell.
Definitely against, Chair.
Right. Councillor Sandy Forrest.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am 4.
Thank you. Mr. Grimley is not applicable. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Hamilton, 4.
Thank you. Mr. Lowe isn't available. Councillor Ransom.
Councillor Ransom speaking, 4.
Thank you. Councillor John Savage.
Thank you, Chair. Against.
Thank you. Councillor David Snart.
Councillor David Snart, against.
Thank you. Councillor Joan Tassell.
Councillor Tassell, 4.
Councillor Tillotson.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Tillotson, I'm 4.
And Councillor Fryer is 4. So if I could just have the officers to confirm the vote, please. Catherine Harrison.
Thank you, Chair. Catherine Harrison. Yes, sorry. That is a vote of 8 for the second recommendation, 3 against, and the recommendation was to go against the officer's recommendation in the report, which in effect would be granting planning permission for the reasons that the officers have earlier summarised, and requiring Section 106 agreement to be entered into to require the ecological offsetting prior to commencement of the development of the dwelling, and delegating authority to officers to draft appropriate conditions for the permission.
Thank you. Karen Widdowson. Lost her.
Councillor Fryer, Karen's just lost her internet, but I was also checking on the votes, and I can confirm that I agree with Catherine that it was 8 for the proposal and 3 against.
Thank you very much. Therefore, we need someone now to bring Councillor Grimley back in and the speakers to thank them and leave. So can someone, who's going to bring, Matt, will you be bringing Councillor Grimley back in?
Yeah, Chair, sorry, I'm back in.
Oh, you're back in. Good, good. Thank you. Right, we now move on to item 2 of the planning application, item 2, P192532/2 Lodge Farm, Ratcliffe Road, Sowerby, pages 28 to 48 in your papers. And we'll now move to Karen Brightman for the presentation. Karen Brightman. There we are.
You're able to share it, Nikki?
Yes.
Thank you. Good evening, members. This second item tonight is a planning application for a single dwelling at Lodge Farm on Ratcliffe Road in Sowerby. The application is an outline application with all matters reserved other than access into the site. Next slide, please. This is the location of the site. You'll see at the front of the site, the area outlined in red is the area that is subject to the outline planning application. So that's the site. The area outlined in blue, which includes Lodge Farm itself and the surrounding buildings and a paddock at the rear, is within the ownership of the applicant, but isn't part of the planning application site. Next slide, please. This is an aerial shot of the site. So you'll see Ratcliffe Road at the front. You can see the farm buildings there almost forming a sort of a courtyard shape. And then to the rear of those is a large building that has been used to operate a haulage business for a number of years from the area, and then cut off at the back is the paddock that we saw outlined in blue. Next slide, please. These are some photographs that have been taken of the site. If we take them clockwise, starting in the top left corner, that is a view taken of the current access into the site from Ratcliffe Road, and it's taken from the east, so it's taken looking towards Sowerby. You'll see the farmhouse is the white building there that you can see quite clearly in the shot, and you'll see a copse of quite mature trees along the screen there, which is between the application site and Sowerby. The next photograph is taken in the opposite direction. So again, you can see the access in the farmhouse and the conifer hedge that forms the edge of the site, and then beyond that, open fields stretching out towards Ratcliffe. The next photograph is taken within the site, sorry, not within the site, it's taken from Ratcliffe Road again, but it's looking back towards the site, so it's a more detailed shot. Then the next slide there is actually the planning application site itself. So you'll see the drive and a sort of green lawned area. The green lawned area is where the proposed dwelling would go. And as you'll see from a later slide, it's likely to be towards the rear of that site. So it would be sited towards where the conifer hedge that you can see there is. Next slide along shows the farmhouse itself. So that's Lodge Farmhouse. You can see the farm buildings in the background, and you can also see to the side where the drive continues on into the haulage area. And the final slide there shows that haulage building and some outdoor storage that's occurring there. Next slide, please. This is the existing site plan. Sorry, it's a little bit blurred, but it shows the stream and the existing hedgerows and trees around the site. Next slide, please. Now, this is an illustrative plan of where the dwelling would go. So we're not being asked to consider siting at this stage, but that is an indication of where the applicant would propose that the dwelling would go. So if we were minded to approve it, we could put a condition on that secured the dwelling in that location. You'll see at the front in green the visibility splays into the site. Now those are as existing. They don't involve removal of any existing hedgerow because they sit to the front of those. Obviously the property's got a history of being used for large farm vehicles, haulage vehicles, so there's no need to improve or alter that access in any way. Next slide, please. The main considerations tonight before members are the principle of development. It's important to recognise that the policy doesn't, or that the proposal doesn't comply with policy CS1. That policy sets out a pattern for sustainable growth across Charnwood, and this site is neither within the service centre of Sileby or adjoining it. It's outside limits to development. It's not in any limits to development in any adopted neighbourhood plans in the area either. It's also important to keep in mind that at the moment Charnwood has a 5-year supply of housing land. I believe the last published figure was 6.41. So there's no need to be looking for housing beyond what that growth strategy that CS1 sets out asks us to do. The applicant has raised their own personal circumstances, which we sympathise with as the reason to have a dwelling in this location. However, it's officers' view that those personal circumstances don't outweigh the principles set out in the development plan for a growth strategy across the borough. And I should also point out that policy CS11 does set out some types of development that are acceptable outside limits to development, but that doesn't include a house that isn't built on the basis that it's an agricultural dwelling or to support a land-based industry. This clearly isn't. It's proposed as a retirement property for the existing occupants of Lodge Farm. The next issues tonight are to some extent academic, because this is an outline planning application, so we don't have these details before us. However, we perhaps need to consider whether it would be possible to build something on the site that would comply in terms of the policies that cover these issues. The officers have looked at landscape. It's their view, having looked at appropriate character assessments and having looked at the site, that you could construct a dwelling on that site that would be acceptable in landscape and visual terms. Equally, for design, there's no good reason that you couldn't design something that would be appropriate and meet with the provisos of CS2. In terms of trees and biodiversity, obviously we've looked at the slides. There are a lot of hedgerows and mature trees in the area, and there's no suggestion at this stage from the applicant that those would be removed. However, if we were minded to approve the development, it would be possible to attach conditions for a landscaping scheme and to ensure that the trees of value were protected. Moving on to flood risk, the site is within flood zone 1, which means there's no risk of flooding to the occupiers, and there's nothing within the drainage details that have been submitted that suggests that the site couldn't be adequately drained. It's not in a critical drainage area, so there isn't a flood risk reason to refuse the application. Finally, in terms of highways, it's an existing access with good visibility displays. There's no objection from the Highway Authority, and there's also ample space within the site to provide parking to meet with our policy TR18 and also the Highway Authority's guideline. So the crux of it really is that this is a decision as to whether whether we could override our development plan strategy, which has been written for the public interest across the borough, on the basis of allowing a single dwelling that would meet a personal interest. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We now have two speakers. If we can bring them in, and we have Mr. Jamie Foote, who is the agent, and that'll be followed by Councillor Poland.
So, Madam Chair, I've just allowed Jamie Foote to speak. Is he able to speak and listen to us?
Thank you, Karen.
Yeah, I'm just going to start the timer of 5 minutes. The time starts now. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak tonight. The proposal seeks to ensure that my clients can maintain their ownership of the site and they can remain in their family dwelling or at that site in their later years in life. My clients have been at their family home for over 35 years and are very much part of the local community. Salby is identified as a service centre founded in Charnwood with a vast array of shops and services which they fully utilise. They are seeking to build purpose-built accommodation for them to move into and live. The proposals will allow for wheelchair access throughout and be in a single level. My client's son and daughter-in-law, who is an active carer, is proposing to move into the family home and care for my clients through their later years. Living in such close proximity to the local services will allow for Mr. and Mrs. Shiblock to remain part of the community that they are now an established part of. The existing farmhouse was constructed circa 1850. It is not suitable for alteration. It will not allow wheelchair access or ground floor living. This has been confirmed by Leicestershire County Council, and there was a letter from appended to the application that supports that the property cannot be altered. We have also had independent assessment from various lift specialists which agree and back up that point. Therefore, the occupational health officer agreed that there was no alteration possible that could allow them to remain in the existing dwelling. The dwelling proposed will be fully accessible and single level. It will be built purposefully to meet those requirements and the ill health of my client. The development will allow for my clients to fully develop the dwelling fit for purpose at their own expense and avoid those frustrations of housing officers that has to see various developments and alterations to houses carried out only to see them ripped out a few years later when the person no longer lives at that property. It is on this basis we are seeking to provide a dependent person's living accommodation. I recognise the concerns that were raised by Salby Parish Council in respect to a detailed design not having been put forward. However, I cannot advise my clients to go to the expense of full plans for a purpose-built accommodation bungalow when the principle of development has to be established and granted first. The application is supported in all aspects other than its location falling outside the defined settlement limits. Those limits date back to the 2004 plan policy. Once the neighbourhood plan has sought to review that policy, it is clear from the grant of permission and the development taking place that those limits will be again revisited in the next plan publication. I know some of you will recall my continuous and successful defence of your core strategy through hearings and inquiries back in 2015. However, the development plan cannot and does not accommodate for all circumstances. We need to look at those material considerations that can be given weight to allow for development where it is not 100% in conformity with the development plan. We now have updated national planning policy in 2019 that emphasises throughout paras 59, 61 and 77, all of which referenced by your officer, the need for specific housing types to meet local requirements. In addition, there is now a requirement for local authorities to allow self-built and custom-built development. This is not something which John would have addressed with a specific policy as of yet. There are no properties available within Sileby to fit the purpose and to allow for my clients to move into. Single-storey, fully accessible properties are not high on a developer's deliverability list. There are material considerations of I's outline that weight in these circumstances and allow for the development to be granted. And I invite councillors to move forward and act on those in this case. Thank you.
Thank you. I've now muted Jamie Foote, and now I'm going to go to the next speaker, which is Councillor Poland. Councillor Poland, can you hear us?
And can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can. So I'm just about to start the timer. Your time starts now. Thank you.
Thank you very much again, members. I brought this application before you today because it's a case of what the regulations say and the actual reality clashing to the point where it will have a detrimental impact on my residents' ability to remain at their property for 35 years into the foreseeable future. I should probably clarify at this point, although we've talked all the way through about this being in Sileby, it is technically in Cosington, hence the reason I'm addressing you tonight. Mr. and Mrs. Shivlock first approached me about having a bungalow on the current application site way back in 2014, where they could live when Mrs. Shivlock loses the ability to go upstairs, which due to medical reasons she will unfortunately do. When that happens, the current property, a farmhouse built in approximately 1770, would become the home to the Shivlock's son and daughter-in-law, who would become carers for them. To put some context onto this, because of its age and design, the Shivlocks have been told there is no way a stair lift could be installed on their stairs in the farmhouse, and the design inside would be wholly inappropriate for wheelchair access. The only way, therefore, Mr. and Mrs. Shivlock would be able to stay at their property, which is also the site of Mr. Shivlock's haulage business, would be to put a dwelling in the front garden. Let's be absolutely clear about this. The site is a large front garden. It is a lawn surrounded on two sides by a hedge which blocks views from the site, from the road and surrounding fields. It has been a front garden since at least the mid-1960s, and the Shivlocks have a photo to prove this, and is not in any meaningful way open countryside. Mr. and Mrs. Shivlock want to put a bungalow on the site, which, given its height compared to the hedges around it, would mean it would be not visible for most of the road and footpath, and barely visible from points. A point actually highlighted in the officer's report, and I quote, "In this case, by virtue of the mature hedgerows aligning to the southeastern and southwestern boundaries of the application site, and the presence of mature hedgerows containing trees on land located to the north of the application, within the land owned by the applicant, it is considered the application site is largely well contained within the wider landscape setting. In addition, it is considered that the addition of a single dwelling on the application site, provided it was suitably designed and mitigated, would not result in any landscape harm to the wider landscape character. A bungalow in the Shivlock's front garden would be in keeping with the pattern of dwellings currently in place along Ratcliffe Road, and would therefore be appropriate for its surroundings. Again, a point highlighted in the report. And I quote, "In respect of any potential residential development on site, this would result in the introduction of a dwelling forward of the original farmhouse, which is located on adjoining land. It is considered that such a form of development would likely preserve the ribbon form of built development, which in turn would likely be in keeping with the prevailing character and built form of Ratcliffe Road within the immediate locality of the site. It is considered that the application site could therefore potentially accommodate a dwelling of appropriate siting, scale, form, material treatment and appearance that would fit within its context. The report confirms the site is in flood zone 1, meaning there would be only a 1 in 1,000 year chance of river flooding, and it also says it is considered that the proposal will not give rise to any material harm in respects to matters of highway safety. Furthermore, the report says no nearby properties would be affected by building a bungalow on the site. Again, I quote from the report, "It is considered the application site could potentially accommodate a dwelling without it resulting in any adverse harm to the residential amenities of the occupants of neighbouring residential properties." Essentially, the only reason this application is recommended for refusal sorry, I'll start that again. Essentially, the only reason this application is recommended for refusal, an application which would improve the quality of life of the Shivlocks for years to come, is because a document says it's in open countryside when any reasonable person would see that it's in fact a front garden. Mr. and Mrs. Shivlock have said they are happy to sign an agreement to say the dwelling they want is a single-storey bungalow. They have also said they are willing to accept a condition that the bungalow cannot be sold separately to the rest of the farmhouse and the rest of the property, both of which I think would be reasonable conditions for members to place on any permission given. I hope, therefore, members can support the Shivlocks in their application this evening. Many thanks.
Thank you. Karen Brightman, would you like to come back and respond to the speaker's comments before we move into open discussion?
Yes, just to remind members that what we're considering tonight is whether a personal situation would override the overall strategy that we have for growth in the borough. That's the starting point for any decision. So the first thing to establish is whether the proposal complies with CS1. Housing need has been mentioned. However, it's officers' view that that need can be met using a sustainable pattern of development. There are quite simply other sites where purpose-built accommodation, perhaps better located with relation to services, could actually be provided.
Thank you. I'm now opening up to the discussion. I have no hands at the moment, so if anybody would like to speak to this application, please now do so. Right, I have Councillor Snart and then Councillor Tassell. Councillor Snart.
Madam Chairman, thank you. There's a couple of things I'd like to get established, if I may. I think I'm right in saying that on many occasions we have actually approved planning applications for a number of houses around Sileby outside the development area because we didn't have a 5-year supply. And it's been mentioned tonight that we have got a supply now of 6.41, which was a figure that was put in place in 2019 March. Could I just check with officers that is the still current figure for the 5-year supply?
Who wanted to come back to that? Karen Brightman?
Yeah, that's the latest published figure. So it's published on a regular basis. So that's the figure that we're working with at the moment.
Okay. Did you want to come back on anything else at the moment?
If I may, Madam Chairman, I think it's been mentioned if we are in agreement to approve this tonight, could we tie this on a condition to the occupation of a family member, and it cannot be sold on its own, or it can't even be occupied by other than family members?
Jacqueline Jackson, would you like to come back on that, and then I'll move to Councillor Tassell?
Yes, I can do. If Karen Brightman wants to come back, she can also do.
Yes,
in terms of linking, it is possible to put a condition. You would normally do that with an annex. This isn't what you'd class as an annex. It's a dwelling in its own right. And looking forward to the future, it's unlikely that the subsequent owners will have a need for 2 large dwellings like this, and you have to think about whether you would be able to protect or reasonably defend keeping that condition in perpetuity in the future. I would be my personal view that would be very difficult if in the future it was sought to remove that condition. Just wanted to point members into the direction of your development plan policies. Obviously, this is outside of the limits, so it is classed as development within the countryside. And if you go to policy CS11, where it talks about new dwelling or development in the countryside, it clearly says that the local planning authority will support rural economic development or residential development which has a strong relationship with the operational requirements of agriculture, horticulture, forestry and other land-based industries. That would normally be the reason why you would be allowing a dwelling outside the limits in an unsustainable location, and you would be going against that policy and national guidance that's contained within the NPPF on that front.
Thank you. Right, I now have 5 speakers. So we start with Councillor Tassell, followed by Councillor Tillotson.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I need some clarification on this. I'm looking at the map, and it's outlined, so we've got no details of what is going to, where you say the bungalow is going to be further to the back. Where would the access be on this lane? Because I understand that the buildings at the back are they haulage buildings, or have we got lorries going down from there down this narrow lane, and possibly vehicles coming out? I don't feel that we've got enough information on the access of this property at the moment. It seems a bit fuddled. Can somebody give me some indications as to where the access to the bungalow would be for vehicles, and where the access and what the access is for properties at the back?
Are you coming back on that, Karen? Because I understood this is a private drive virtually, just for business. Yeah.
The point is that the access that's included in this application is the access onto Ratcliffe Road. So that is the existing access. The actual layout within the site isn't known. That would be a reserved matter, because all we're being asked to consider is the principle of a dwelling. And I know a bungalow's been mentioned, but it's not in the description that it would be a bungalow, but we're being asked to consider the principle of a dwelling on this site. If that was to be approved, then the reserved matters would cover the layout and the design of the property, and that may well be how the particular dwelling is accessed within the site and how it's divided off from the haulage use, which obviously could continue because that is an established use of that part of the site.
All right. Can
I come back, please, Madam Chairman? Because I'm not really. In the officer's report, she mentioned that there was the reason for one of the reasons for refusal of this was for the fact that there was a lot of other suitable properties around, and that there was over 3,000 properties being built in the area. Do we know for a fact how many of these builders, these developers, are going to put one-storey or single-storey properties?
I don't think.
And as you say, it's never been mentioned, but to be quite honest, I mean, okay, they could have a house with a stair lift, which is what I've got, but a bungalow has been mentioned by the officer. That's when it was a single low building that wouldn't be dominant. How many developers are actually building bungalows or single-story properties?
I would need clarification on that, but I don't think that's what we're looking at the moment. And whether it's a stair lift or a complete lift, I mean, people put in complete lifts, but I'll ask the officers. But around the borough, how many are building bungalows with access? Most places have to have DDA access now anyway. But I would ask for clarification, but I don't think we can put our decisions on what other builders are building elsewhere. But I would ask for clarification. Who wants to come back? Karen?
Yeah, I can come back on that. The point is really that the development plan policies allow for a pattern of growth that's focused on sustainable settlements. We also have a policy that asks us to seek a good mix of housing within the sites that are appropriate for housing. So whilst I can't tell you exactly how many permissions there are for bungalows across Charnwood, one of our development plan policies, policy CS3, does require us to provide for housing need. So it's incumbent on us when we make decisions on planning applications to ensure that there are dwellings that would meet that local need. If that's a need for older people or people with disabilities, then yes, that has to be done. And this particular site isn't needed to meet that overall borough-wide need.
I've got three other speakers. I'll now move to Councillor Tillotson and then Councillor Bentley, followed by Councillor Bailey and Councillor Grimley. So we go to Councillor Tillotson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd have no issue with an annex to the farmhouse for the reasons officers have described, but I can't justify a separate property on this site. So I propose accepting officers' recommendation to refuse this application.
Thank you.
Chair, I would like to second that.
Thank you. So that's a proposal by Councillor Tillotson to go with officers' recommendation, seconded by Councillor Bentley.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As the next one to speak,
Yes.
I was actually going to propose it, but that's already been done by Councillor Tillotson, so I've seconded it. So thank you.
You didn't want to say any more. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't think there's actually more to add now. It's been proposed that we go with officers' recommendations. I can't see it complying with CS1 or CS11. As much as I sympathise with the applicant, I can't see how we can pass this against officers' recommendations.
Thank you. So, Councillor Tillotson, did you want to come back? No.
No, I'm quite happy with that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bentley, did you want to come back?
Councillor Bentley again. No, thank you, Chair.
Okay. Right. We have a proposal to accept officers' recommendation proposed by Councillor Tillotson and seconded by Councillor Bentley. I have no further speakers. So with that, I will go to the vote, which again will be done in alphabetical order. So again, if you're for the officer's recommendation and this proposal, it is for, or then it's against or abstained. So Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bailey, for.
Thank you. Councillor Bentley.
Councillor Bentley, Chair, for.
Councillor Camsell.
Against.
Is that against, did you say?
Yes. Councillor Forrest. Councillor Forrest. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Councillor Forrest, I am for accepting officer's recommendation to refuse.
Thank you. Councillor Grimley.
Thank you, Chair. I'm for the officer's recommendation to refuse.
Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Hamilton here. I'm for.
Thank you. Councillor Ransom. Councillor Ransom.
I'm for officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor John Savage.
I am for the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor David Snart.
Madam Chairman, I'm for the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Tassell.
I'm for the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. And Councillor Tillotson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm for.
Thank you. And I am also for. Councillor Hilary Fryer, for the officer's recommendation. I can now move to the officers to confirm it, please.
Chairman, can I just clarify, because I lost a bit of sound there. Councillor Forrest, can you confirm if you are for or against?
I have Councillor Forrest, if
Hang
I may,
on.
through you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
I confirm that I am for the officer's recommendation to refuse planning permission.
Thank you.
Okay, so Madam Chairman, I have counted the votes. The legal advisor unfortunately has left. She must have internet problems. So I can confirm that it was Votes for was 11, votes against was 1, and therefore I confirm that the motion is carried. Can someone from Democratic Services or the other legal advisor confirm that for me, please?
If I
Yes,
may, sorry,
Satch
Catherine.
as the Legal Services Manager, I can confirm I've been with this application throughout, and I too have recorded 11 votes for officer recommendation and 1 vote.
I too can confirm, because I'm given a tick sheet, and I confirm it as well, that can be kept with the rest of the papers if necessary. So thank you very much. We now move on to our last item 3, which is P200618/264 Ivesford Road, Shepshed. Now, other information has come to light, and there has been some discussion over this application, and therefore we would like to have this deferred. It's been recommended for deferral, and I move that the consideration for the application be deferred to allow the submission of corrected plans, reassessment of those plans, and for a period of consultation with neighbours and interested parties to take place. Do I have a seconder for this?
Yeah, I'll
proposal?
second that, Chair. Councillor Bentley.
Thank you. Now, you've all had your papers, but if anybody would like to have a bit more clarification on the deferment, then the officers are quite happy to ask them. So I've got Councillor Tillotson, and then Councillor Bentley, and then Councillor Snart. Councillor Tillotson.
I just didn't lower my hand from before, Chair. I don't have anything to
say. Councillor Snart.
Yes, Madam Chairman, thank you for letting me come in. I just thought it would be good to thank the objectors with their intervention, if you like, and say thank you. It's also interesting to see that people do get involved, and it does make a difference when they do get involved. So I think we ought to just register that. Thank you.
Did any of the officers want to say anything? We're not going into a discussion on this, because obviously it will come back to us, and therefore we don't want to fetter our decision at all. So, Jacqueline Jackson, did you want to come in?
I've just come in, Chair. Thank you. It's just to confirm that obviously we would recommend, as Councillor Fryer has set out, that you don't start to debate the application. Yeah. We're looking for clarification on the accuracy of the plans. It's an unusual situation because this property is partway built, so we have to make sure what's actually being built is what is in front of you. So we wouldn't want you to make a decision on plans that we couldn't confirm are accurate. Therefore, we would advise you just to wait until the next committee when that can be clarified.
Okay, if I could just clarify with one of the officers, we don't have to take a vote on this now, do we? Because that could fetter us if we voted against or for.
You Chair, the recommendation by officers has changed to one that you defer the application.
Yes.
So you've made a recommendation that the application be deferred for the reasons set out in the extras report, and that as far as I understand it, would need to be voted upon.
Okay.
So that the item would be in fact deferred.
Okay. So we go to that. We go for the vote for deferment of this application. Councillor Bailey.
Councillor Bailey, Chair, for.
Councillor Bentley.
Councillor Bentley, Chair, for.
Councillor Camsell.
For, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Forrest.
I'm for, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Grimley.
Councillor Grimley, for.
Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Hamilton, for.
Councillor Ranson.
Councillor Ranson, for.
Councillor Savage.
Councillor Savage, for.
Councillor Snart.
Councillor David Snart for the deferment.
Councillor Tassell.
Or Madam Chairman.
Thank you. And Councillor Tillotson.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Tillotson, I'm for the deferment.
And I'm also for deferment. So that should be unanimous with one
Yes,
absent.
thank you, Chair. Yep, I can confirm it was a unanimous vote in favour of officer's recommendation to defer, so a vote of 12 in favour.
Thank you very much. So that brings us to the end of our planning meeting tonight, plans, and we have now the list at the back of your agenda of the decisions made since our last meeting. So this is just for our information usually, and it is really for people if they have anything they want to comment on, but really it's just for information. So you've all got that. That starts on page 63. I would like to thank you all once again for, we're getting used to this system a bit now, but thank you all very much indeed, and all our speakers and anybody that was listening in to planning meeting tonight, and also to the officers and everybody for their support. I would like to remind you that the next planning meeting is on the 18th of June at 5 o'clock, but we will have our pre-meeting again at 4:30. So if I could just remind Matt and the officers, there is always a pre-meeting at the moment. So anybody else, safe journey home. Well, you are home.